A gift from pain. Prologue. I have always felt like an outsider in my family, a stranger among the smiles of those who have lived through generations. As an adopted child in a family where the age gap between members could easily accommodate another generation, I felt the starkness of this difference acutely. My father, born in 1927, was a World War II veteran, and my mother, a decade younger, embodied a gentleness that had been eroded over time. Her deafness on one side made her world feel unbalanced, and I found myself caught in the middle of it all, unsure of how to navigate the complexities of our relationships. This disconnection in my family reached a climax one ordinary night, one that I would replay endlessly in my mind. It was a night when I was jolted from sleep by a strange noise coming from my father's room. Groggy and half asleep, I reasoned that it could have been one of our pets knocking something over, or perhaps my father, in his nightly bathroom ritual, had accidentally dropped his cane. I chose to ignore it, turning my back on the nagging uncertainty and sinking back into the warmth of my bed. This decision would haunt me for years. The incident. Morning light brought a harsh reality crashing down around me. My nephew's terrified scream sliced through the usual morning quiet, propelling me from my bed and racing into my father's room. The scene I encountered was one I had never expected to see. My father lay sprawled on the floor, a blanket wrapped tightly around his neck, his skin a disturbing shade of blue. Adrenaline surged through me as I lifted him back onto the bed and unwrapped the blanket. His breath was shallow and labored. I called for an ambulance, the details of that frantic moment blending into a blur of panic. This moment, seemingly ordinary in its unfolding, became the catalyst for a seismic shift in my family's dynamics. After my father's fall, he was admitted to a veteran's home due to his declining health. Tension thickened in our home. Each word and gesture filtered through the lens of blame. My mother's grief manifested as rage directed at me, the convenient target for her swirling storm of emotions. It didn't matter that my father's fall was an accident, a tragic twist of fate that I could not have foreseen. In her eyes, I was the culprit, the reason her husband, my adoptive father, lay in a bed at the veteran's home, his once vibrant spirit now dimmed. The fallout. As the initial conflict festered, it became a crack in the dam of our family dynamics, releasing a flood of long-suppressed frustrations and resentments. My mother's blame became the soundtrack of my life at home. Each conversation a minefield where every word I spoke was weighted and found wanting. The more she blamed me, the more I withdrew into a shell of indifference, attempting to protect myself from the pain of her words. Then came a moment that felt like a lifeline. I decided to join the army. It felt like the first step towards something new, a path that was entirely my own. Yet that dream quickly became entangled in the web of my family's expectations and my mother's fear of abandonment. To her, my departure wasn't a young man's quest for independence, but a betrayal. In a desperate attempt to keep me close, my mother spoke to the army recruiter without my knowledge. She told them that I had changed my mind about joining, painting a picture of doubt and indecision that was entirely hers, not mine. This act of betrayal left me stunned and filled with a mix of heartbreak and anger. It was clear that my aspirations were secondary to her need to keep our family unit intact, no matter the cost to my dreams and autonomy. Faced with the collapse of my plans and the unbearable atmosphere at home, I made a decision that would shape the next few years of my life. I would go to college. This backup plan, which I had never intended to use, became my lifeline. When I received my acceptance letter from a university 200 miles away, it was my ticket out of the stifling environment of blame and resentment. I packed my life into a few boxes, uncertain of when or if I would return. A new beginning. Life away from home was a stark contrast to what I had known. College presented a world of opportunities and challenges, but it also came with its own set of difficulties. I took on 2 jobs to support myself, juggling academics and work in a relentless cycle that left little room for rest or reflection. Balancing work and school became my new normal. The campus library became a sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself among the stacks of books and the quiet hum of students studying. Here, I wasn't the son blamed for my father's accident. I was just another student trying to make ends meet and build a future. The job required meticulous attention to detail, sorting and shelving books, ensuring the library remained a place of order and learning. This steady job contrasted sharply with the chaos of my personal life. In stark contrast, my job at the local cafe was a bustling hub of activity. As a barista, I crafted lattes and cappuccinos for a steady stream of customers. The fast pace was sometimes overwhelming, but there was joy in the rush, in the smiles of satisfied customers and camaraderie with my coworkers. This job taught me resilience, the ability to keep smiling even when exhausted, and to find peace in the rhythm of the work. Both jobs, though exhausting, provided me with a sense of purpose and were an escape from the turmoil back home. I was proving to myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet. Each paycheck represented not just income but a step toward reclaiming my life from the shadow of guilt that had been cast over me. A lingering shadow. Despite my attempts to move forward, the question of whether my actions had been justified or selfish remained unanswered. The emotional toll of separation and blame was heavier than I anticipated. The physical distance from my family did little to ease the burden of guilt and unresolved anger. I missed my father, the man who, in his quiet way, had been a source of strength and stability. His absence felt like a gaping wound that refused to heal. After graduation, I landed a stable job, one that felt both like a triumph and a compromise. It marked a steady climb away from my tumultuous past into a semblance of adult life, characterized by paychecks and small freedoms. However, the rare trips back home were exercises in tension, with the air thick with unspoken recriminations. I found myself yearning to see my father, whose vitality seemed to shrink a little more with each passing day. My love for him remained, even amidst the family strife that buzzed around him. Driven by a mix of guilt and love, I set a new goal for myself: to earn enough money to afford the best possible treatment for my father. This became an obsession, the idea that financial success could somehow translate into redemption, a way to atone for my perceived failings. The call, the irony of working tirelessly to support someone who felt like a stranger was not lost on me. Despite my efforts to heal and move forward, the news of my father's passing knocked me back to square one. One fateful night, I received a call at an hour so late it felt as if the world itself was holding its breath. It was my aunt on the other end, her voice steady but laced with unmistakable sorrow. "It's about your dad," she said, and in that instant, I felt the ground beneath me shift. My father had passed away after a prolonged illness. An event we all saw looming on the horizon yet hoped would somehow steer clear of our shores. I was hundreds of miles away, cocooned in the life I had built, far from the home that felt more like a battleground than a sanctuary. The news hit me with the force of a tidal wave, a mix of grief and guilt swirling in a tempest that I couldn't contain. I didn't have time to pack, no moment to ponder what to bring. The urgency of the situation propelled me forward, and I found the first mode of transportation I could, an early morning bus. The journey was a blur, each mile stretching on as I grappled with the reality of my father's death and the inevitable confrontation with my family. The funeral. Arriving at the funeral home, the gravity of the situation finally settled in. I saw him there, lying in repose, a tranquility on his face that had eluded him in his final years. My father looked at peace, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within me. The sight of him, so still and serene, broke through the walls I had built around my heart. However, as I stood before him, I was acutely aware of the finality of death, how it leaves no room for apologies, for mending fences, for saying all the things left unsaid. The weight of my unresolved feelings toward my family, my mother's harsh words, and the guilt of my perceived negligence crushed me in that moment. I wished for nothing more than to turn back time, to relive those last days with the knowledge of their fleeting nature, to offer words of love instead of silence. My father's passing created a great void that would never be filled, yet it served as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of forgiveness, understanding, and compassion. Standing amidst the somber faces of those who had known and loved him, I realized that holding on to anger and resentment served no purpose but to prolong the pain. Confrontation. As I stood in line to pay my respects, my heart ached for the man who had been more than just a father figure. He had been a guide, a confidant, and a source of unwavering support. But the moment of closure I sought was shattered by my mother's voice, sharp and laden with grief and accusation. "His death is partly due to him," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "He's a cruel person for ignoring his father, a selfish person for going to college and not taking care of his family." Her words, like daggers, cut through the solemn atmosphere, turning heads and drawing a collective breath from the gathered mourners. The accusation was a blow, not because it was new, but because of its public nature and the timing. It was a reopening of wounds that had never fully healed, a reminder of the years of blame and misunderstanding that had driven a wedge between us. The aftermath. In that moment, I felt my heart break all over again, not just for the loss of my father, but for the loss of what our family could have been. The sadness overwhelmed me, a tide of emotion that threatened to pull me under. I had come to say goodbye, to find some semblance of peace in the wake of my father's passing. But instead, I was met with public condemnation from the one person whose acceptance I had longed for. The eyes of the guests were on me, some filled with sympathy, others with judgment. I realized then the futility of trying to defend myself, to explain my side of the story to those who had only heard one version. The damage was done. My mother's words had painted me as the culprit, the son who had abandoned his family in their time of need. Deep down, I knew the truth. I carried the weight of guilt, replaying that fateful night in my head, wondering if things could have been different if I had acted sooner. I also knew the pain of being pushed away, of being blamed for something beyond my control. That pain had driven me to seek distance, to build a life away from the constant reminders of my supposed failures. A moment of solace. As I stood there amidst the whispered conversations and sideways glances, I understood that my mother's words, though hurtful, could not define me. They were a reflection of her grief, her inability to cope with the loss of her husband, and the strained relationship with her son. It was a sadness that I shared, but I also recognized that carrying the burden of her blame would not bring my father back, nor heal the rift between us. Sitting on the porch of the funeral home, my tears fell silently. The weight of my mother's public accusation had left me shattered, alone with my grief and the sting of her words. It felt as if the ground beneath me had opened up, swallowing the last remnants of what family meant to me. My aunt found me there, her presence a gentle reminder that I wasn't completely forsaken. "What's the matter?" she asked softly, contrasting the harshness I had just endured. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The dam broke, and I told her everything. How my mother blamed me for my father's death, how she labeled me cruel and selfish in front of everyone. The words poured out, raw and unfiltered, finally finding an outlet. Understanding and acceptance. My aunt listened quietly, her expression one of sadness and understanding. When I finished, she sighed, a sound that carried the weight of sorrow for her sister's actions and empathy for my situation. "Your mom is grieving and lashing out," she said finally, "but that doesn't excuse her words or how she's treated you." I then shared with her the story of that night, how I had heard the sound that roused me from sleep, the horrifying discovery in the morning, and my frantic efforts to help. It was a confession of sorts, an attempt to explain my side, to make her see that I wasn't the villain my mother portrayed me to be. To my surprise, my aunt took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You are my new adopted son now," she declared. Her words not just a statement but a promise, a pledge of support and acceptance that I hadn't realized I was so desperate for. "And your mother? She doesn't deserve you. Not if she can't see the truth and pain in your heart." In that moment, her words were a balm to my soul, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the turmoil. Here was family, not bound by blood or obligation but chosen, offering me a place when I felt I had nowhere left to turn. As we sat there, the cool evening air wrapping around us, I realized this was the beginning of a new chapter. My aunt's acceptance and understanding gave me something to hold on to, a chance to navigate this new reality despite the pain and heartbreak. A path forward. With my aunt by my side, I began to reflect on my life and the choices I had made. The burden of my mother's blame felt lighter, though still present. I knew that while the rift between my mother and me might never fully heal, I wasn't alone. I had found a family in my aunt, one that accepted me for who I was and not who I was supposed to be. Over the following months, I focused on rebuilding my life, both personally and professionally. I threw myself into my work, aiming to excel in my career while also honoring my father's memory. I sought therapy to help process the grief and guilt I had carried for so long. It was a challenging journey, but with each passing day, I felt more empowered to reclaim my life. As I started to heal, I found myself longing to visit my father's grave. I needed to connect with him one last time, to share my journey and the lessons I had learned in the wake of his passing. I wanted him to know that despite the turmoil, I was finding my way, returning to the past. When the day finally came, I drove the familiar route back to the small town where I had grown up. The landscape had changed in some ways, but in others, it felt as if time had stood still. I parked near the cemetery, my heart racing as I approached my father's grave. The sun shone brightly, illuminating the headstone that read his name, and I felt a wave of emotions wash over me: grief, love, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Kneeling before the grave, I traced my fingers over the letters etched in stone. "Dad," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not being there that night. I'm sorry for everything." Tears streamed down my face as I poured out my heart. I told him about the choices I had made, the distance I had created, and the burden of guilt I had carried for so long. As I spoke, I felt a sense of release, as if the weight I had been holding onto was slowly lifting. I shared my hopes and dreams for the future, the love I had found in my aunt, and the journey I was embarking on to build a life that honored both him and myself. Finding peace. Over the next few years, I continued to navigate the complexities of my relationship with my mother. While the wounds of the past were still fresh, I learned to approach our interactions with a sense of compassion. I began to understand that her actions were a reflection of her pain and grief. Although she never fully acknowledged the hurt she had caused me, I tried to find ways to reconnect without placing myself in a position to be hurt again. I made occasional trips home, each time feeling a mix of anxiety and hope. During these visits, I focused on finding common ground, seeking moments of connection amidst the turmoil. We shared meals, reminisced about the past, and cautiously opened up about our feelings. While it was a slow process, I felt the layers of resentment begin to peel away, revealing glimpses of the love that had once bound us together. New beginnings. As I continued to grow, I also found love in my personal life. A few years after my father's passing, I met someone who shared my values and dreams. Together, we built a life filled with laughter, understanding, and mutual respect. It was a stark contrast to the turmoil of my past, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of stability and belonging. Through this new relationship, I learned the importance of communication and vulnerability. I opened up about my experiences, sharing the struggles I had faced and the journey I was still on. My partner was understanding and supportive, encouraging me to embrace my past while looking forward to our future together. Reflection and growth. As I reflected on my journey, I came to realize that the pain I had endured had shaped me in ways I could never have imagined. It had taught me resilience, empathy, and the importance of forgiveness, both for myself and for others. I understood that while my father's death would always be a part of my story, it did not have to define the entirety of my existence. I continued to visit my father's grave, sharing my life updates and dreams with him. It became a ritual, a way to keep his memory alive while also allowing myself to heal. I recognized that the love we had shared transcended the pain and misunderstandings of our past. Conclusion. As I stood at the crossroads of my life, I felt a sense of peace. I had learned to embrace the complexities of family, love, and loss. The scars I carried would always be there, but they had transformed into symbols of my strength and resilience. With my aunt's unwavering support and my newfound sense of self, I was ready to navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. I understood that family isn't just about blood. It's about those who stand by you when the ground gives way beneath your feet. And as I walked forward, I felt a renewed sense of hope, knowing that my journey was far from over.